Joey Evans, morning.
Hey.
It's absolute privilege to have you on the show this morning. You and I have known each other for a couple of years now. I view you as a friend. And for those viewers that don't know Joey Evans, just short version, Joey broke his back about 15, 16 years ago and managed to come back from being a paraplegic to actually finishing the Dakar race, which is viewed as one of the most grueling off-road rallies in the world. Since then, of course, he's also grown his own business empire in terms of becoming a globally recognized speaker. So I look forward to this, Joey. I think you've got some great stories to tell, and I'm going to get straight into it.
Awesome.
So,
let's go. Good to see you.
Before the accident, the Dakar Rally was your ultimate dream. Okay. So what did that race represent to you before the accident, and how did that change after the accident while you were actually lying in your hospital bed?
Yeah, for sure, man. So, for a lot of bikers, I think out there, the Dakar Rally is the ultimate. That's always the big one. Longest, toughest off-road race in the world. Tons of guys have died on the race. The finishing rate is less than 50%. So it's really just like it's the one to get for a lot of guys. There's a lot of other cool races, but that over the years, over its like 40 something year history now, has become like the biggest one. And so I think for every biker, they've got like this little dream in the back of their mind but the one day that would be the one. For me, it was just, man, I just loved the look of it on TV. I loved what it was, racing through the deserts in North Africa and that kind of stuff. And I was like, man, that'd be cool. And that would be the goal. But the reality is it's ridiculously expensive, especially coming from South Africa into euros and all that sort of stuff. So it was one that was like, probably before the accident, it was like, yeah, I'd love to do that, but I don't know if I will ever be able to, financially and that kind of stuff. But it was like, yeah, one day I'm going to do that race though, And then,
can you tell us, sorry to interrupt you, can you tell us a little bit about the accident? What actually happened for those guys that haven't read your book?
Yeah, for sure. So, it was 2007, so it's 18 years ago now. And, it was right at the start of a race, off-road race on a motorcycle in Heidelberg, just south of Joburg. And I was doing well. It was the second last race of the season. I was lying second in the championship, in this off-road championship. And I just centered right out, from the start, and it kind of all narrows in through a gate. And a guy came in behind me who was coming in a bit too fast for the corner. And so he crashed into me from behind. And we both went down, and I ended up breaking my back. I broke my T8, T9 vertebra. I was unconscious for several minutes, smashed out a lot of my teeth. And when I came around, I couldn't feel my legs. And so I was paralyzed from the chest down. And that turned into months in hospital. My back was fused, and I was fortunate enough that after several weeks, I started to get just a little bit of movement in one of my toes, and my legs had gone all skinny. It was kind of like resigned that this would be how to be the rest of my life. But then it started to, I started to get a little bit more and a little bit more. And then, and now the rest is what we're going to talk about today.
So doctors gave you a 10% chance of walking again. I mean, if you're a business leader facing a negative challenge in business, what kind of mindset says, listen, let's go all in on that 10% probability instead of just but basically just resolving that this is your fate and live with it? I mean, you had to decide to give it all for that 10% chance.
Yeah, for sure. I guess if I look at my situation, it was a case of there was when at first they were like, hey man, this is it, the rest of your life. And then when I got that little bit of movement in my toe, they were like, look, maybe a 10% chance, but if you do walk again, you'll walk badly with walking aids and that kind of stuff. But I think in these situations, and it's probably translates a lot to business as well, is you do need to be realistic. You're not just like, no, I'm going to walk again, you'll see. And you're like, just all in. You got to be realistic of where you're at. I'm exposed to a lot of guys and girls that have spinal injuries because people know about my story, and they'll often want to connect me with friends or family of theirs that have accidents and stuff. So I get to see a lot of people in hospitals and that kind of stuff. And the family members generally are all around them going like, you'll walk again, for sure, for sure. And the problem is, or the problem that I have with that is that it's like, it's not always realistic. You know, sometimes someone has a permanent spinal cord injury, and the way we have stuff right now, that may never be possible. And we see a lot of people have been in wheelchairs for 40, 50 years, you know, and so you do need to have a realistic view of where you are. And I think that would be the same for business. You can't just be like, yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. Like, you got to, what do the numbers say, bro? You know, where we're at. But then as a leader, or for myself being the leader of my own life, you have to look at it and say, okay, that's where we're at. Now, where do we need to be? And so what is it going to take to get where we need to be? What can I do to maximize that 10% chance as much as possible? And it's not going to be by being miserable and focusing on the 90%. It's not going to be feeling sorry for myself and lying in that bed and not doing anything. It's going to be doing the physio. It's going to be doing whatever the doctors tell me. It's going to be eating right. It's going to be, just giving myself every possible opportunity to get better. And so if you wanted to translate that over to business, it's the same thing. If you got all these, and we see it, especially here in South Africa, guys are like, oh, it's terrible, the country's bad, everything's crashing and burning and all that sort of stuff. And if you start buying into all of it, then what do? You start dropping your stock levels. And so the client wants something and now you don't have stock. So yes, you do lose the sale because you were negative prior to it, and you start cutting down on all the other areas and cutting and cutting. And when you get into that spiral, your business will go under, and then you'll blame it on the country, and you walk away from it broke and people all unemployed. And so you got to you got to be realistic, but you've also got to be like, right, what do we need to do? And you do what you can. There's always people who do well when a lot of people around them are not doing well. And it can be physically, it can be business, whatever. And so it's like, accept the 90%, but then maximize that 10% and be all in on the good stuff.
Be a realist with a healthy dosage of optimism.
100%. But it's not all flowers and sunshine. Don't get suckered into that. But also don't get suckered into that it's miserable and terrible and just there is no light, Yeah.
In your book From Para to Dakar, you quote Viktor Frankl: "Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how." In that moment of total crisis, how did you forge your why, and how did it become the strategic anchor for your entire 10-year journey to actually completing the Dakar?
Yeah, it started off in the hospital, really. That like people who understand spinal cord injuries, it is sudden. So it happens in a split second that you damage the spinal cord, and it's permanent. So the rest of your life. And so it's one of those that's a really, really, really harsh, incredibly difficult thing to accept. It's not like a cancer where you slowly get sicker or that it's instant, and then it's forever. And so it's a very difficult one to try to come to terms with. And for me, being in that hospital, being paralyzed, probably the first thing that pulled me through or that gave me reason to go on would be my incredible wife, Meredith, and my four daughters. I had these four little girls. They were all under the age of 8, the day I had the crash. So you realize that, like, hey, as a dad, I've messed up here, man. I need to support these girls. I need to look after them. I need to give them a life, and that kind of stuff. And so a lot of that kind of self-pity, which is completely justified, when you're in that place, but it doesn't serve you. And so a lot of that was like, all right, we got a lot to do here, man. And so best we get is a lot better. You know what I mean? I need to be able to function and stuff. And so that was really the first motivation to, like, all right, enough with self-pity. We got to look forward. And I'm also the kind of guy that I need big goals. I like to have a big juicy thing I'm aiming for, that kind of stuff. And having that goal of racing Dakar before, suddenly that was like, that would be the ultimate comeback. You know what I mean? If I could come back from being paralyzed and go and race the Dakar Rally in my mind, that would be the ultimate comeback. And that would really be, overcoming this physical challenge. And so then that became the goal. And I was like, yeah, we're going to do that. That's the big physical goal. Obviously, there's lots of other things around that, with family and finances and all that sort of stuff. But but that became the big physical goal that would symbolize me beating my injury, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I like that big, hairy, audacious goal.
Yeah,
Your
man,
recovery
you got to have.
wasn't one giant leap. It was built on lots of small, tiny victories. You've got a speaking topic at the moment, 10 meters at a time. Can you describe to the listeners the mental discipline required to focus on these small incremental steps when your ultimate goal was actually 9 or 10,000 kilometers long?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So it's really like when I was in the hospital, if I thought of my whole life and I thought about all the areas this would affect, being paralyzed, every single thing, along with an injury like this, you lose all bowel control, you lose all bladder control, you lose your ability to digest food. It's such a massive thing. And all of those things, I still deal with to some extent now. I still can't run, I can't jump. I've got a lot of permanent physical challenges. And when I thought of in the hospital, that whole thing, it was too much. It was too much. And so um, I remember getting the advice in the hospital of like, okay, take it one day at a time. Don't think of your whole life. Think about today. And that really made a big difference to me, is that just hack it through. Just today is all you got to get through. And then life becomes a lot easier. And I think for anyone in their darkest time, you lose a loved one, or whatever happens, financial, um, catastrophic things that happen and things like that. When you're really down in that right at the base, that's the best way to live, one day at a time. You don't have big audacious goals. You just like, just one more day. And so that was a big one in the beginning. And then when I started riding again, I sucked. I sucked really bad. And it was very humbling to be at races and being lapped 5 or 6 times by guys I used to be able to beat. And that's when I developed that like 10 meters at a time. And I think I actually read about that in an Enduro World magazine. There used to be a printed magazine years and years ago, and it was talking about advice for enduro. And they were always used to say, stop where you can go again. So don't wait until you get really stuck and then try to go again. You want to stop in a place where you can start again. And the best way to do that is you pick a spot, get to that spot, and then stop. And then you look ahead for another line and you get to the next spot and you stop. And suddenly that advice, being the hacker that I was super valuable. And so that became a bit of a motto then over the next few years, was just 10 meters at a time. You pick that one rock ahead and you say, right, just to that rock. And you just get to that rock. And then you look again at the line and you can see better now, the next part of the track. And you go, okay, cool, just to that rock. And so that 10 meters, 10 meters, 10 meters was the way that I hacked through races. And I would finish very, very over a long period of time right at the back. But I'd finish them because of the 10 meters by 10 meters. And if I translated that over to the Dakar goal, it was exactly that. When I said I'm going to race the Dakar Rally in that hospital, it was completely laughable. And because I was paralyzed in a wheelchair, I'm married with 4 daughters, I'm effectively unemployed because I worked for myself and I did solar panels on roofs and that kind of stuff. So it's up and down ladders, it's physical labor. So I am in a really, really bad place physically. I'm in a very committed place in terms of family, and I'm in a really bad place financially. And to say, I'm going to go race the Dakar Rally that costs over R1 million or whatever, was absolutely ridiculous at that time. But when I broke it up over the years and how it played out was a case of, all right, what do I need to do? I need to eat today. I need to eat healthy food today. I need to get to physiotherapy. I need to try and like do the exercises they're helping me to do in the pool. I need to make sure these legs get moved and the muscles get massaged and stuff, just to help keep them as much as we can. I need to make sure I use catheters today every time I have to, so that I don't pick up bladder and kidney infections. And I need to try and sleep tonight. That's my goal today. And then slowly but surely it became like, all right, let's start to strengthen these legs. Let's start to learn to stand with braces on them between parallel bars. And then let's start to, and slowly but surely built up. And it was 2.5 years before I sat on a bike again. And I rode a little circle around a flat piece of felt, and that was it. And then it was 3.5 years after that I went to my first race, where I got lapped 6 times and did my 10 meters, 10 meters, and then I started finishing races. And then I did my first multiple day race, was in 2013, 6 years after breaking my back. That I was the first time I did a multiple day race. And then I did it, and then other challenges we'll talk about in a moment, and then I had um, and then I did my first international rally in Morocco, which was in 2016, and that was the last thing I needed to qualify for Dakar. In 2017, I was on the start line, and so it was a 10-year journey, but it was all broken up in little bits. And when you look back, it's this crazy story, but it didn't play out like that when I lived it. When I
Mm.
lived it, it was just 10 more meters, 10 more meters. What's the next little thing? 10 more meters. And that's how it played out in reality.
Can you think of a single darkest painful day that you experienced during your recovery, like that one day where you were ready to give up? And what sort of
Yeah.
practical mechanism did you use then and do you use now to push through when you know you've put everything on the table, there's nothing left, but yet you continue?
Yeah. There was lots and lots of dark days, and like, especially as a speaker now, talking at conferences and that kind of stuff, people are like, wow, it's just incredible what you did and that kind of stuff. And there were incredible times, but a lot of it was just ugly and messy and tears and frustration and that kind of stuff. It definitely wasn't all pretty, and I wasn't always brave, and I wasn't always like, hard, but it was just, some of those dark times just hacking through. Probably the biggest standout sort of physical one for me was a night, and it was the early hours of the morning, and I was super sick, and it was like a bug that had obviously gone around. I was back from the hospital at home, but I was still using a wheelchair, still very paralyzed. Had a ramps put in my house and that kind of stuff, and one of my daughters had, I want to say, I'm trying to remember all the details now, but it was, we had these four little girls, and it was like the stomach bug, it all goes around and everyone's vomiting at night. And, it was one of those. And I was in the bathroom, just really, really sick. And so I'd managed to get to the toilet, but I have no core strength. So I've got my wheelchair turned around, like it's in front of me, like I'd be pushing the wheelchair, and I'm leaning on the wheelchair trying to balance on the toilet. And I've got the most terrible diarrhea I've ever had. And along with an injury like I had, when you lose all bowel control, you lose all muscle and all that sort of stuff, you often get really bad hemorrhoids. And so I've got this hemorrhoids, I've got zero bowel control, I've got just this crazy diarrhea. I've still got all these problems with my teeth because I've smashed all my teeth out and stuff. I've got a bowl on my lap and I'm vomiting into this bowl at the same time. And what had happened was the DB board in the house had caught on fire. And so it was a hot connection. And so it had burnt out all the electricity in the house. And we had this smell of burnt out electrical wiring, no lights, everything's just terrible. My daughter's vomiting, my wife's trying to take care of them, and so she's really struggling on her own, and I can't help her, and I'm just sitting there vomiting in this bowl with all this sort of situation. And man, it was tough, but I actually had a little laugh because I was like, oh, it was one of those where I was like, man, you can't make this up. This is just crazy. This is ridiculous. And so I think, like, if I think of that one, the thing that got us through that was kind of humor. You're like, what are the odds, man? What are the freaking odds of this? And so yeah, had a bit of a laugh about that one. But it was like the perfect storm that night. And there were many other times which were really, really tough like that. But that was one that was just like, yeah, that was tough. And so the mechanism for that one was humor, and we used a lot of humor. And humor helped a lot because when you're a grown man who's lost all that kind of ability with bowel control and bladder control and that kind of stuff, it's incredibly, incredibly humbling, and it's hard. And also, like, when I started walking and I'm tripping everywhere, and people who didn't know would be like, "Hey man, you had a few to drink there," and they'd say things and stuff, and you got to laugh it off, man. It's like, yeah, you reply something like, "What do you mean? It's 9 o'clock in the morning, man. We're good. We've started already." Or, sometimes you got to laugh at yourself. You got to laugh at your challenges and kind of face it with a bit of humor. So I think humor can be very valuable in tough times.
Mm. On a lighter note, during your recovery, training up for Dakar, you had another crash. Wasn't that a sign
How's that a
to
lighter
pack?
note?
Wasn't that a sign from above to pack it in and stop this nonsense? What happened to how did you crash?
Yeah, so I was racing the Pongola 500, and I was just it was that one was definitely my fault. It was It was one where I had a guy and I was following behind him and he overshot a corner and I made the corner. And so I was ahead of him and I've been following him for a while. And so I was like, oh, get on the gas, man. You know, I don't want to sit behind him in his dust again. And so I got on the gas and I was flying down this dirt track, man, probably doing like 140 or something, you know, really, really going fast. I was on a 500 and there were cows in the area and I knew there was cows in the area and you're racing. And when you're racing a dirt road off a dirt bike in this kind of situation, you're almost like running down a passageway. You know what I mean? You got trees either side, and they're just like, and a car just stood out, man, at the last second, and I didn't get it. It was on the border of Mozambique and up in Bongola, and I didn't get a chance to brake or anything, and I just T-boned the cow, boof. And I was very fortunate in that I went over the cow, and my bike went into the cow, but I ended up separating my collarbone from my shoulder. I broke off a few ribs, and I broke my elbow, and I tore the triceps muscle off the elbow with parts of the bone attached and stuff. And so, and I tore open my forearm as well, exposed all the bones in exposed the bones in my forearm, and it was pretty remote where I crashed. I ended up lying in the veldt for several hours. And it was, yeah, it was tough. And it was a week in hospital. They eventually took me by road to Richards Bay, a week in hospital there, and then back in Joburg. And it was like 6 months of healing and stuff from that injury. And that was that was a big setback. That one was a tough one. But you talk about, you know, signs and that kind of stuff. To be honest, I don't believe in any of that stuff, man. I'm one of these guys. I'm not superstitious at all. I don't believe in like something's a sign to quit, or if something happens, you know, that kind of stuff. I think we make our own, um, you know, signs, and we find our own meaning in things. But it was certainly one where it was like, is the risk worth the reward? You know, what do they say? Is the juice worth the squeeze? You know, it was really that kind of thing. Was like, man, is it time is this really worth it? What we're trying to achieve here? You know, and it took a long time to kind of figure that out in my head if I should give in or not. And I kind of took a big solo ride from Joburg down to Cape Town over 5 days after I was pretty healed up, and just spend a lot of time on my own for 5 days, just you know, solitary on the bike and stuff, and thinking about life and that kind of stuff. And my outcome was that no, I'm gonna still do this, man. I can do this. I've got some fight left. We can do this. And so, yeah, I like recommitted, and that was 2014 when I hit the cow. And so the trip on my own would have been 2015, and that was when I was like, nah, we're going back, man. We're gonna push through this one as well, you know. But it was tough, man. It nearly all ended there. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what any off-road biker would ask you, of course, was the bike
How's the
okay?
bike?
Yeah.
The bike was stuffed. That bike was proper stuffed. Well,
Joe,
actually, I took the GPS back.
we'll edit that out afterwards, Joe.
Nah, leave it in, leave it in. The GPS was completely stuffed up, like the whole thing. It just in pieces, literally. I took all these pieces back to Garmin actually, and I was like, "Oh, this is the GPS I had. I need another one." And they were like, they gave me a discount on a new one. They're like, "Do you mind if we keep this one? We've never seen one like this before." So they've still got it up there, you know. But yeah, it was a mess, man. It was a proper mess. That was a big one, and a lot of guys will die from an accident like that. You know what I mean? And so. You know, it's a risk. I mean, you ride motorcycles as well. You know, your wife Kim, she rides motorcycles too. You guys get it. Um, it's you're running a risk, and you can choose your risk in terms of how you ride. You know what I mean? If you're riding right on the edge and you're pushing, your risk is high. If you're being very careful, your risk is low. But there's still a risk, and it can happen to anyone. And so even now, when I ride, I still have a risk of like I could be paralyzed again. I could die on a motorcycle. It doesn't go away just because you've had one big one. It's not like, oh, you've had your turn and now you're good. You know what I mean? It's the risk is always there. No matter how good, no matter how much experience, there's always risk.
Yeah. Your wife Meredith supported your dream that she admitted was crazy to begin with, right?
Yeah.
In any high risk venture, getting buy-in from those kind of stakeholders is critical. How do you, Joey, articulate your vision to get buy-in from stakeholders in business when you know the odds are stacked against you?
Yeah. You know, it's hard to say for all business and that kind of stuff, but I can tell you how it played out with us is that you know, no one knows me better than Meredith knows me. You know, she knows me better than anyone. And she didn't marry a guy who plays video games and sits on the couch. You know what I mean? She married a guy who does this sort of stuff. And so she knows that's how I work. To her, it's completely mental. You know what I mean? She's like, no, I don't get it. But she cares about me, and she wants me to fulfill my own personal dreams and that kind of stuff. And there's stuff for her that I'm like, man, that just makes no sense to me. But I back it because it's important to her. And so, I back what's important to her because it's important to her, and she does the same for me because it's important to me. And so I think, part of that in our marriage is basically looking at it and putting the other person, first, if that makes sense, and then it works really well. But it was a lot of sacrifice in many ways for her to back me on this. But I 100% could not have done it without that support, without the support from her, without the support from my family. So without the buy-in and that kind of stuff, um, definitely couldn't do it. I wouldn't be able to tell you how to get buy-in for work ventures and that kind of stuff. But I think definitely, if you have a vision, um, and it excites you, people see that and people feel that. And so when you go into that meeting and you've got like, man, this is how it can go, and you can paint that picture, tell them that story about how this journey plays out and how it's amazing at the end, and you're fully committed, people will buy in. People want to be part of cool dreams. They want to be part of cool stuff. That's what all of us want to be part of it. And so buying into to dreams is what it's about. So you got to just sell the story, show them the vision, like open their eyes to it. Yeah.
I think that's sagely good advice, even in business. So after
Another one,
raising,
another one quick. I'm sorry not to cut you there, but with raising the money for Dakar, it was the same kind of thing. I've seen so many guys along the way want to do Dakar and haven't been able to do it because of finances and things like that. And what I noticed is a lot of guys would say like, "Hey, if I can raise 1.5 million rand or whatever, that's the goal, and then we're going to go to Dakar in January, whatever." And I'm like, that's no one's buying into that. I realized that what you have to do is you have to say, I am going to Dakar in January. This is what's happening. If you want to get and become a part of this, this is how you do it. And so you're like, I'm going, come with me. Not like, if it works out, I'm going. And that little change in mindset makes all the difference. So perhaps it would be the same in business when you're seeing someone saying, this is where we're going. This is what we're doing. This is what we're going to make. This is the dream we're going to build. Do you want to be part of that dream? Or must I go to the next guy and find another guy who's going to be part of that dream? That would be a better approach, to be like, hey, if we can get the money, we can do this, kind of thing.
yeah, I like that. So after raising your own fund to do Dakar, you're in the Dakar Rally 2017.
Yeah.
It's 2 days before the finish, and you get clipped by one of the rally cars. What happened
Yeah.
there? First of all, how did this happen?
Cool.
Again.
It was a little more than clips. I'll tell you how it played out. So what happened was the race was 13 days long, and I was at the back for most of the race. Just in I was out of my league. I knew I was out of my league, and I just did that whole one day at a time thing. Just kept getting up the next day, getting on the start line, and I started every day. You started like 4 a.m. And every night I was finishing in the dark, and it only got dark at like 8 p.m. or whatever. So it was just long, long, long days. And I was, so yeah, before sunrise to after sunset every day, sleeping for about 4 or 5 hours each night. I was really, really destroyed from the end of day 3. I was just a mess, and I just was like hanging on, expecting to be eliminated any time, but just kept hacking my way through the days. And it was 13 days long, the race. And on the second last day, I was stone last, and I'm riding in this semi-arid desert. And it was like one of those 2-spur Jeep tracks winding its way through. And over the years, the tracks had got like deeper and deeper. And so it was like 2 parallel ruts winding its way through. And outside the ruts, there was some vegetation. So you couldn't ride outside the ruts. You had to, and the middle monarchy was too steep. So you had to just kind of pick a rut as a biker and ride. But the ruts were filled with fish, which is like really, really fine dust, like talcum powder. So they were hard to see. And I was in this left-hand rut, kind of hacking my way through, as bikers, you could do 50 or 60 Ks an hour. But with the trucks and cars, they have four wheels, and so they naturally track into those ruts. So these guys are coming through at like double the speed, and they all have a button in their car they press that sends a message to the biker in front that there's a car behind. And so you have this alarm that goes up on your bike, which says, and it flashes and everything. And that tells you there's a car normally about 200 meters back, and you need to look for a place to where you can stop and get off the track out the way. And I'm in the left-hand lane, and my alarm goes off, and I turn around expecting to see the guy 200 meters back, but he's 20 meters back doing double my speed. I've literally got a couple seconds to get out the way, and I swing the bars over to try and swerve out the way. But because I'm in that rut, it was so deep, it was up to my axle at that point, and the bike just wouldn't get out the rut, but I'd already committed my weight. And so I just kind of went over like this, and I separated off the bike as it hit the ground. And the car missed me by just centimeters, but he just crashed straight into my bike and completely rode right over my whole bike. And then he stopped about 30 meters away, and the navigator kind of put one foot out the car and gave me a thumbs up. And I was like, no, come back here, and all that stuff with a few other words we won't put on the podcast. And then he got back in that car and off he went. And so I was there alone with this destroyed bike. The petrol tanks, there's 3 on the bike, 2 of them were just destroyed. All the fuel had run out. The whole frame of the bike was bent. The seat was torn out, the mountings, all the wiring and everything in the back had ripped up. The exhaust was completely flattened. The right foot peg was totally sheared off the bike. The whole navigation tower completely crushed, all unusable and broken off the front end of the bike into the bars. The bars were bent. All the triple clamps that hold the front suspension were bent. Like the actual metal on the triple clamps was twisted. It was just the bike was just destroyed. And I dragged this bike out of the track because there was going to be some more cars and trucks coming through, and I stood it up and I couldn't believe it. Second last day of a 13-day race after a 10-year journey, and I'm out the race, and it's hard to tell you what that feels like.
Tell us what happened then.
All right, so
You
probably
stole
the first
another
feeling
bike.
probably the first feeling, to be honest, was I am so glad this is over. I'd suffered for that was the 12th day of just suffering. And once you're out the race, they send a helicopter. You get inside that helicopter, and the pain stops straight away. And you get a good meal, and you get nice and warm, and you get a shower, and you're done. And the pain stops. It's beautiful. And standing there, I was like, finally, it's over. That now I'm done. And then standing there, I was like, Joey, you know what you're like. If you're not going to finish this, you got to come back next year, and then you got to start from day one again. And I was like, I don't want to come back next year, man.
Yeah.
I want this to be it, And so I decided, I thought back to being in that hospital. And I thought back to this race. And I thought about what that race symbolized to me and the importance of finishing it as well. And I was like, no, it doesn't end like this. This is not how the story ends. And so what I did is I actually started stripping that bike, and I had to strip the whole exhaust off the bike because it was just all flattened in, and it was bent into the back wheel as well. And I isolated the fuel tanks that were damaged, and just had the one fuel tank. I stripped a lot of the navigation off the front end of the bike so I could get the bars to turn. And I had to repair the air filter as best I could, and then get the seat back in and just kind of ram it into the mountings and stuff. Stripped off some of the wiring at the back of the bike because that whole bike was just sopping wet with fuel, and I didn't want it to spark and have a little impromptu braai in the middle of South America. And I just did everything I could, and I managed to get that bike working, where it started and it ran. And then what I did is I couldn't ride in the track because my wheels were like this. They were just all totally bent up and everything. So and there was a lot more cars and trucks coming through now in those ruts. And so I just kind of zigzagged through the vegetation, and I'm running out of fuel because I got just one tank with a little bit of fuel left. And the next place I hit civilization is like 65 Ks away. There's no other riders behind me. And that amount of fuel would take me maybe 20 kilometers tops. And I just limped along and did the same again, 10 meters, thinking back all the last 10 years, all the sacrifice, everything I put into this, all the money, that bike was, I'd had to finance that bike, that wasn't even part of the money I raised. And so it was just oh, it was heartbreaking, man. And as I'm running out of fuel and just going along, I found a bike, in the semi-arid desert. And the guy he'd crashed, he'd broken both his arms, and he'd been medevaced out the race. And there was no ways I was going to make it in. It would have taken me weeks to cover that distance on that bike. But I found this bike, and I'm not allowed to ride that bike, but I can use parts from that bike, and so that's what I did, And there was a couple of Argentinian spectators in the middle of nowhere. They were on dirt bikes, just dirt biker dudes watching the race, old dirt bikes. And these guys helped me, and we stripped the exhaust off that bike, and we siphoned the fuel out of that bike, and we took the whole side of the frame with a foot peg and all that sort of stuff. And we put it onto mine, and I'd lost hours by now. At this point, I was 4 hours behind the guy who was second last. And then off I went, and I still needed more stuff, but I had to get going, or else I was going to miss the cutoff. The cutoff was I had to be on the start line for 4 a.m. at the next point, so it would mean I'd got to ride through the night. And so I rode all of that day alone for literally hundreds of kilometers through South America without seeing another bike or a quad, or I never saw any other guys that whole stage, and just a few cars and trucks. And then it got dark, and then that night through forests and valleys and mountain passes, and then it started to get close to midnight, and I had to cross a whole bunch of rivers. And crossing rivers at night in South America on your own is pretty scary. And just kept going. And 1 a.m. I'm still riding. 2 a.m. I'm still riding. At about 2:15, I got to the second last bivouac, and my crew was waiting up for me. And I managed to get 1 hour of sleep, and then I rode that same bike another 850 kilometers the last day, and finished the Dakar Rally.
That's fantastic. Did you ever find the owner of the bike?
Yeah, I did. I looked him up. He was a guy from Colombia, and when I saw he's from Colombia, I was like, yeah, I probably should give him his stuff back. And so I did. We stripped all the stuff off the bike, and we shipped it all back to him. So I'm not such a sketchy South African boy, but yeah, we gave it all back to him, and he was super good, and we've stayed in contact and stuff. And he was so pumped, man. He was like, Joey, well done, man. He was like, and he was super stoked for me, which is just very typical of a biker brotherhood mindset. You know what I mean? If I ever went out that race, I'd hope some dude would strip my bike and finish.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think all guys think like that. All biker guys, they're those sort of guys.
Mm. You've got a talk entitled "Ride Through the Night." Is that a metaphor for life as well? The way that
100%. Yeah. No, for me, riding through the night means pushing through those dark times. And I've had a few. Obviously in the hospital after hitting the cow, Dakar, and there's been many others even more difficult than any of that since then as well, to be honest. And it's and there's these dark times where you need to get through that night. It's going to be better on the other side, but you got to get through the night, and it's sometimes long and it's hard, and you don't know how hard it's going to be. And you can't see the track ahead of you at night. You can't see where you're navigating. You just kind of like just can do what you can. And we all have those times where you've just got to keep going, even though you don't know how this ends. You don't know how you can ever get through this or whatever, but you've just got to keep going until the light comes again. And when the light comes again, and then you can see again, and then you start to get an idea of the future, and things start to work out. But in those dark nights, you just got to keep going. And so, yeah, I think ride through the night to me means just push through and stay in the race no matter what.
You say when things are really tough, it's sometimes just chapter one of a really cool story, and the ending is entirely up to you. How critical do you think it is for a leader to be the chief storyteller of their company or organization, and reframe a crisis from a story of failure into a future of comebacks?
You know what I think? I think we all love comeback stories. My favorite movie is the Shawshank Redemption, and I think that's a common one with a lot of guys. A lot of guys love that one, and we love all those kind of movies, and we love comeback stories, man. I mean, and in business conferences, I've sat through so many business conferences where people have shared the story of Apple, or they shared the story of other companies that had like really, really dark times, and it was turned around and it was amazing and all that sort of stuff. And so it's like, we all love those freaking comeback stories, but A comeback story is not a comeback story when it starts. It's a freaking tragedy. It's horrible. It's terrible. It's dark. It's a mess, And so, and when you're in that mess, you don't know that you're at the start of a comeback story. So you got to have a big stuff up right in the beginning, or else you just have a success story. No one wants to hear it. If you have an Olympic person who comes and speaks at your conference and they're telling you about how they were a head boy, and then they went on to university and they played for the university, and then they were picked for the provincial side, and then they went to nationals, and then they did this, and then they went all the way to the Olympics and they won a gold medal and all that sort of stuff. You're like, wow, that's awesome. But it's, whereas when you hear about that kid who grew up in the township, and he kicked around a soccer ball that was made of rubber bands and newspapers, and he never had shoes, and then you know what I mean? That's the freaking story you want to hear. But you think that dude who's, when he's in that place, kicking around that elastic band soccer ball, um, if he's just feeling sorry for himself and saying, "Oh, I don't have a proper soccer ball. What can I do?" You know what I mean? It's like, that's the stories you want, man. You want the dude who overcame the odds and stuff. So if you're in a place as a business or anything like that where it is tough and it's a mess and it's like things are not going well, you're at chapter 1. So here we go, dude. Let's make a comeback story. It's the perfect position to be in to make a comeback story. And if you believe that, and you can sell it to your staff, or you can, get their buy-in, so to speak, that this is what we're doing, and you start rallying those troops and stuff, man, now it's amazing. Now you're on this, dun, 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 here we go, big comeback, and so you got to have every comeback story. The first few chapters are freaking miserable, man. So if you're in those miserable chapters, good for you, man. You can make a comeback story.
The sun always comes up. After Dakar, you wrote the book From Para to Dakar. What did you learn about your own journey by taking a chaotic 10-year experience and structuring it into a narrative or story with clear lessons for others? I mean, you travel the world based on some of those experiences and share those lessons with people in your audience. What are the biggest takeaways for yourself as a person?
Yeah. I never planned on writing a book, to be honest. People would say to me when I was going to Dakar, "Oh, I should write a book about this." Like, people would just like say stuff like that all the time, you know what I mean? And I'm like, yeah. But I never planned on it. And then when I was hit by that car and I found the bike in the desert and rode through the night and stuff, I was like, holy crap, man, that is an ending. And so then I decided, I need to write this book. I need to put the story down, and it was mainly for, like, I hope my grandkids get to read it one day, and I hope, it was more like for like preserving the record of what happened, and that kind of stuff was probably the real motivation around it. And I never ever, when I wrote it, thought about what messages do I want to put in this, what takeaways. There was none of that thought, to be honest, in the book, and so the book's just written, how it happened. But then I was asked to tell the story at some of the KTM motorcycle dealers around South Africa. And so I did that. And then some of the guys who were at those talks would be like, "Hey, man, Joey, would you come and share your story at my office, with the staff and that kind of stuff?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, for sure." And they'd be like, "Well, how much do you charge?" And I'm like, "You happy to pay for that?" I didn't even know that was a thing, And so then I started doing speaking at corporates, and then I joined the Professional Speakers Association of South Africa and started to like learn about the whole art of storytelling and takeaways and conference speakers. I didn't even know, all of these things, and so I just learned more and more and stuff. And then I do talks, and then you get Q&A from people, and they'd be like, "What made you think, like some of the questions you've been asking today, and what were some of the things?" And I'm like, "I don't know, I've never really thought about it," kind of thing. And so then it forced me to then go back on this life journey and go like, okay, why did I have to go? What was important? What made me in those dark moments push through? What happened in my life that gave me the tools that I needed to have that sort of resilience or grit when that sort of stuff, how could I ride through the night? Because when I was a kid, I'd be scared of the dark, and now I'm riding a motorcycle alone through a freaking forest in South America, crossing rivers in the middle of the night. You know what I mean? It's like, how do you develop these things and stuff? And so then it was like, this became a bit of a passion of mine, learning about mindset and about grit and about how we develop resilience and all these sort of things. And so then the lessons started to come, and then those are some of the takeaways and key lessons that I now put into the talks and try to share, ways for people to develop resilience in their own lives and to push through tough times. We all have different stuff. When I'm speaking to a group, you'll find, most of them have no interest in motorcycles at all. But they have their own challenges and they have their own goals, and those lessons are applied throughout all these areas. And so that kind of became the thing then. And then I've spoken now in, I think, probably just over 50 countries, so being able to travel all over the world, and you see different cultures and how they value different parts of that story, and how some stuff really hits home, and with different cultures and different places and stuff. And so I guess in doing this, I've learned a lot about myself, and I've been able to extract those lessons and those learnings out of a story that was just my life. It was just something I was hacking along day by day. But looking back, I go like, oh wow, yeah, that was that, or that was that, and you start to piece it together. Also, along with that, you'll be pleased to know that my wife has got to travel with me to most of those, and so she's been able to travel all over the world. She's had some fantastic experiences and opportunities, and so by her believing in my goal and my dream, she's got a lot of free holidays out of this as well. So she's had some good rewards out of putting up with this dude with crazy goals and dreams.
Well deserved though.
Very well deserved. Yeah.
Many entrepreneurs struggle after their big win, quote unquote. It's so easy to lapse into complacency. After Dakar, you started planning immediately new, in some cases, even tougher challenges. The Africa Eco Race, Baja 1000, etc. How do leaders prevent success from turning into complacency? Or how do a normal person, you've had that big win, that success in business, and now you can sit back and relax, and tomorrow will provide for itself. How do you prevent that lapse into complacency?
Man, the
What do
way
you
I
do?
like to think about it, well, I'll tell you the way I think about it is we've all met that dude, and he's sort of our age. I know we're a similar sort of age, and he'll be at a braai, and he'll be telling you how he played first team rugby in high school, and how the Oaks used to fear him, and he's got all these great stories about how he would hit Oaks and that kind of stuff. And you're chatting to a dude who's like, 40, 50 kilograms overweight, and he's like into his sixth castle standing there. And pretty much since high school, he's done nothing. And high school was where he hit his prime. And then the rest of his life, he just freaking told stories about high school. And it's like, it's sad. You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't want to be a guy who's that guy. I don't want to like go and race the Dakar Rally and then talk about the Dakar Rally my whole life and do nothing since. Now, my Dakar story, or that journey from being paralyzed to racing Dakar, I honestly believe it's a freaking cool story, and it deserves to be told. But it's like, am I just going to be that guy now tells that story forever and always does that, and now just parks off and does nothing? And so I don't want to be that. I don't want to be a guy like that who lives on past successes, and I kind of see my life as being over, like that guy does. He sees his life as being over. Now he's just kind of like living out his life. I always want to have new goals. I want to have unchecked goals when I kick the bucket one day, and so I think it's important to not look at your life being done, but always looking forward. The past is always there. You'll always have it. So for me, I don't believe I need to keep racing. I don't believe I need to keep doing bigger, crazier goals and that kind of stuff. It can be goals in many different areas, but I do need to keep aiming for the next thing. So the first one for coming back from Dakar was to write that book. I mean, that's something. I've never written a book. I don't consider myself a writer. I pretty much flunked a lot of English in high school, and it was, I'm not that guy. I don't particularly read a lot of books or anything like that. But I put my mind to it and be like, right, I'm going to write a book. And it was probably harder than racing the Dakar, to be honest. But I did it, and I sent it to my publisher, and they originally offered me a ghostwriter. And I was like, nah, I want to do it on my own. I want it to be like I wrote it. If people say, hey, did you write it? I can say, yes, I wrote it, every word, And when she edited it, I said, you can edit out the grammar stuff that needs correcting and the spelling, but don't change it. It must be my words. When the person reads it, I want them to hear my voice, And so she was like, cool. And I sent her the finished manuscript, and she read it in a weekend, and she phoned me on the Monday, and she's like, I'm publishing it. It's awesome. So it was great, you know. But that was that was a tough one. And then a few years after that, so I did the Dakar in 2017, and I also wrote the book in 2017. And then in 2020, I had the opportunity to go and race the original Dakar routes through North Africa. So the one I did was South America, Paraguay, Argentina, and Bolivia. And then I got a chance to go race the original route, which is now called the Africa Eco Race up in North Africa. And we raced from Monaco to Dakar, Senegal. So it was all of Morocco, Western Sahara, Mauritania, down into Senegal. And I went and did that. And that was another 13-day race in 2020. And managed to finish that with its own bunch of crazy stories and everything there as well. Just some really crazy stuff happened. And then I've ridden in, I try to ride in every country that I speak in. And when I travel, I'll add in different countries and do bike trips. And so I've been also able to ride in just over 50 countries now, I think, something like that. And ride with all sorts of guys all over the world. And so lots of like biking dreams. And then every now and again, you got to have that big, like we're talking, those big, hairy, audacious goals and things like that. And so I heard about a race a few years ago called the Baja 1000, and it's a race that's the longest non-stop off-road race in the world. It's about 1,000 miles, and it's through the Baja Desert in Mexico, which is like that long, skinny piece that sticks out into the ocean. And so I went last year to go and do that race in 2024. And I went to you do it as a team. So you have one bike and you have like 5 or 6 riders or whatever, and everybody rides about 200 miles, and you can do 100 miles, get in the vehicle, 12, 16, 18 hours later, get on the bike again, do another 100 miles, that kind of thing. And the bikers all kind of rotate like that. But there's a class called the Ironman class where you do the whole thing solo. So you get on the bike in the beginning and you do the whole distance. And I was like, that's the one I want to do. But it was brutal. And I was massively unprepared in so many areas. I made so many mistakes. I pitched up in Mexico with a couple of bags and just tried to take this thing on without proper support crew, without pre-running, without nutrition, with all sorts of stuff. And I got about 2/3 of the way through the race, and I raced for 27 hours straight, and I nearly died in the desert. And some guys were there, and they found me, which was fortunate. And I got taken out, and I made a list of all the mistakes I'd made. And for this last year, I've been working on all of those, changing a lot of things and stuff. And in about 10 days, I head back to go and see if we can finish that thing, to go give it another bash. The race is the 13th of November. So I don't know when this is going to be uploaded, but 13th of November, we're back in Mexico to see if we can tick that box. And then we got to find another goal.
So you've had a lot of last minute, repeated encounters with last minute adversity. So what's more important, meticulous planning or being to improvise on the spot?
Oh man, there's such a cool phrase at Dakar, and it's called live off the land. So with Dakar, you can't organize someone to have a spare tire for you in the middle of the desert. You can't organize it. But if you blow out a tire in the middle of the desert, and you can find some local guy who's going to take you on his little scooter into a local town, and you can find something to repair your tire from some dude who's got a tractor business, and then you can get another guy in an old jalopy car to take you back out in the desert and fit that to your tire or whatever. You're allowed to do that. So it's called living off the land, so you can make a plan with the things you have there. Now, meticulous planning is massively, massively important. And that's a lesson I learned last year on Baja. I was winging it way too much, and I got burned. It was my fault I didn't finish. I got burned bad, and I learned a lot of lessons there. And it's I can put up my hand and say I failed, and I failed because of planning. But sometimes you can do all the planning you want, and then you just get taken out. I mean, you spoke in your book, when I read your book, I remember that you spoke about black swan events, stuff that just happens that no one can predict. No one saw it coming. It's just one of those things. And so it's the same on bikes, man. You can have the best bike, the best prepared, you're fit, you got everything right. And all it takes is, you hit an animal, you just drop your bike in a funny way, and a rock goes right through your motor or your clutch cover, or something like that. There's There's so many of these things that just happen in a split second that flips everything upside down. And so it's in those moments where now you have to rely on your inner grit, where you go like, all right, okay. It's easy to say, yeah, I gave up. I like to call it a noble excuse. If you speak to anyone who's gone to go run a race or gone to go and do a, whether it's a comrades or a marathon or a triathlon or whatever it is, and you say, hey, how did it go? And then he'll say like, oh, I didn't finish, and he'll tell you why. Like I just did now. I just told you my noble excuse why I didn't finish Mexico, and we've all got these noble excuses, that's what was the level that allowed me to quit the race, if that makes sense. We all have noble excuses, and so, but everybody has a different level of a noble excuse. You all have a guy who will break his pinky, and he'll be out the race because he broke his pinky. You'll get another guy who will tape that pinky and he'll ride on, and then he'll break another 2 fingers and he'll tape those up as well, and you'll still finish the race. And so you go like, well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is this guy's more resilient. He decides that no, that's not good enough for him to quit. And so it's all about like increasing the level of that noble excuse. Like, what is the point at which you quit?
You and I did a ride in Botswana some time ago, and you mentioned to me you had a piece of sticky tape on your Dakar speedometer or nav console. Tell us what was written on that piece of tape.
Yeah, so it was one of those, little brother stickers you make up with a little machine, and it said, you didn't come this far to only come this far. And, I wanted to remember the price I'd paid to get to the start line of the Dakar Rally. I wanted to remember the price my family had paid, my friends had paid. Everyone had put effort into that, the amount of money, the amount of time, just everything. And the reason to stop would have to be pretty freaking huge to offset that. And so that became my why. And I wanted it front and center. I wanted to remember that when I was there, that there was nothing that was going to be worth quitting for, man. The only way we go out of this race is we get time barred. And if I'm pushing my bike in the middle of the desert because I've got nothing left, when I go out, then that's how we go out. But we don't go out quitting, we go out because we just ran out of time. That was the only way. And so that was the reason I did that, to remind myself, like, why I'm here. What do we got to do here? Yeah.
Let's talk about giving back. In Baja last year, you raised more than R250,000 for I think it was the Adaptive Sports Fund. What made you choose them specifically, and what goals have you got in the future in terms of giving back a little bit into society with all your success?
100%, man. I think it started really because when I was in hospital, I was there, I'm paralyzed, and you are helpless. And I was 32 at the time. And so to be a 32-year-old guy who's like a sportsman, you're fit, you're strong, you've never felt what it's like to be helpless in your life, and suddenly I'm helpless and I need help. I need people to literally help me to go to the toilet. I need people to push me around. I need someone to help feed me. I need someone to do everything for me. Financially, I'm in a mess, all that sort of stuff. And so many people, rallied around me. I had guys people brought my wife to the rehab center every day I was there. They would drop off meals for my family. They would make little pink lunch boxes for my daughters for school. There would be guys in the riding community would come to the hospital and come and visit me. Some guys I'd never even met who were like national champions and all sorts of stuff. They would come by and they'd see me and they'd like offer encouragement and spend time with me. And then they'd build ramps in my house. So when I got home, I had ramps in my house for the wheelchair. There was so much stuff that people did for me, and it carried on for years. And even going to Dakar, I had to raise 1.1 million rand. I had nothing. And people all donated and put in part of that. And we raised 1.1 million rand that I could actually go and do the race. And that was all done with just people rallying around me. So I have been the recipient of massive, massive help on so many levels from so many people. And so I guess in a way I feel incredibly indebted, to society. And so I've gone back to the rehab center where I was treated at many times over the last 18 years now, and spoken and spent times with guys who are paralyzed. I've visited probably hundreds of guys in hospital, um, who are in, in these challenging times and that kind of stuff. And part of it was the Adaptive Sports Fund is run by a buddy of mine. His name's Jeff, and Jeff's a quadriplegic. And what he's done is he set up a fund that helps people with spinal cord injuries to do sports, but like proper sports, man. We're talking like snow skiing, we're talking scuba diving, wakeboarding, go-kart racing, rock climbing, some really cool stuff. And we became mates a few years ago, and and he had this fund, but he was really, really struggling with the cash. It's hard, to find money for this sort of stuff. And so we sat down and we started making plans. And then I'd personally donated to it before, and I'd had had another company that donated to it that I did a talk at overseas. And then last year I said, okay, I'm going to race this Baja, and anyone who donates to the Adaptive Sports Fund in that time, I'll put their name on the motorcycle. And so we had a whole bunch of names on the motorbike, and we raised R250,000, which is it's more money that the Adaptive Sports Fund has ever seen in their lives. This whole year they've run go-karting events with hand controls. We've done rock climbing, we've done adaptive golf, we've done all sorts of stuff. And we hope to do it more and more in the future. And so that's one of the hardest things about when you're paralyzed, definitely for me, is that I didn't get to hang out with my buddies anymore. We'd be at a Brian, they're talking about the ride they did that morning, or the trip they went on to Lesotho and stuff. And I didn't get to do any of that. I was invited to the Bri still, but I couldn't do all the other stuff. And so to be able to play sports and hang out with your buddies is a massive part of mental health and being around. And so I think to give people who have physical injuries a way to have sports and hang out with people is massive as part of recovery and as part of like finding value in life. And so I'm very passionate about it. Jeff is a super good dude, and he is one of these guys that's dealing with his own massive challenges of being quadriplegic while still helping others. So he's a badass guy, and more than happy to back a dude like that.
Great story. You family is super important to you. You're a father with 4 daughters. How does the empathy of being a dad translate the grit required for being an extreme adventurer? Difficult.
Oh man, I don't know which one is more
before.
No, for sure, but I don't know which one is more extreme. I don't know when you're saying extreme, which one it is. But yeah, I mean, there's I think a lot of it is just that pushing through when it's tough, and staying calm under pressure. When you're in the desert and those things go wrong and it's like you're in a mess, you got to think straight, man. You got to be like, cool. You got to be like, right, what is the situation? How do we work with this? And I think the same is that when you have a family and a home, as a dad, it is good if you are, if you can be constant, you can be calm, you can be thinking clearly, making good decisions, and definitely, as a dad, you want to be the rock, who's there that people can rely on. And it's hard because you're dealing with your own demons and you got your own challenges and that kind of stuff. But I think for both of them, it requires pushing through when it's tough, and sometimes pushing through when it's tough in the desert is like sucking up physical pain. And sometimes, at home, it might be accepting when you're wrong and saying sorry and trying harder and doing the stuff that's hard to do emotionally. But either way, it's that same thing of riding through the night. When it's tough, you show up.
My wife says she's never in the wrong, so I'm going to have to take that under advisement at home.
Well, I know you both, and I'd back her on that.
Thanks for that, Jerry. You stated before, my body doesn't make the rules. My mind was going to finish, and my body just had to keep up. Expand a little bit for us on that statement.
I think mindset, people say mindset's important, but I believe it's everything, man, everything. Because when you're in those places, like with Dakar and other races like that, you literally have a button on your bike. Literally, there's a button on your bike. You press that button, a helicopter comes and picks you up, and it ends. So it's like, it's so quick just to stop it. And when you're in a when you're in a time when it's tough and all that sort of stuff and your body's reached its limit, just to press that button, man, it's so tempting just to go, okay, we're done. You got your noble excuse. You know, you've had a problem with the motor, you've had a problem with this or whatever. That's cool. You press the button, and it all ends. And so it's 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 easy to quit when it's physically tough, but an hour from then, when you've eaten and your heart rate's down and you're clean and you're back at the bivouac, and then you go like, crap, man, why did I do that? You know what I mean? And so you got to, your mind, it can go further than your body feels. And that's with almost every sport, everything in life. When you think you're done, you know, 9 times out of 10, you're not done. There's still more in it. You can still go further. And so if your body makes the rules, you don't get up and do the things you need to do on the days you don't feel like it. You know, you don't go to work on the days you don't feel like it. You don't go to gym on the days you don't feel like it. You eat the rubbish on the days that you're feeling stressed. If you just follow your body, life ends up pretty miserable, you know, and you become a bit of a mess. And so you have to live a life where your mind makes the rules, because your mind thinks clearly and thinks of the future and that kind of stuff. So the best advice, I guess, and I mean, I don't get it right all the time. I don't want to sound like I'm one of these like guys that's like super disciplined or anything like that. I'm certainly not. I'm the kind of guy that works out but doesn't say no to dessert, you know. But you know, you got to. It's important that your mind rules your body. That's a big one. You got to. Mind makes the rules, not how you feel. It's what you decided.
Yeah, 80% is the pie hole, huh? In a diet. Last two
100%. Yeah.
last two questions, Joey.
Sure.
If you could go back to that hospital bed in 2007, knowing what you know now, 2025, what's the one piece of advice Joey 2025 would give Joey 2007 in that hospital bed?
Oh man, you know what? I think if I think back, um, you know, over this whole journey and that kind of stuff, one of the beautiful things about this whole journey was that I didn't know how it would end up. I didn't know um, a lot of things, and that's both good and bad. And I don't know if I would have got through those first months and years if I'd known how bad it was going to be, you know, how bad the injury was I had, and what it meant for the rest of my life. I still suffer with it every day. I mean, I know that we had to, you know, the last couple of days have been crazy. I was obviously in the hospital yesterday with all sorts of bladder stuff that I'm dealing with right now. And so it's like sometimes some of it was a case of it was lucky I didn't know how hard it was going to be, because I don't know if I would have been able to handle knowing all of that. But, you know, obviously a lot of good came from it. It's been incredible, you know, but I don't think, you know, you spoke earlier about signs and, you know, that you should give in or this kind of stuff. And some people will say that like, you got to, you know, everything happens for a reason. And I hate that phrase, to be honest with you, man. I know it helps a lot of people, but I don't like it. You know, I don't think everything happens for a reason. I think sometimes just really, really crappy things happen. And I don't think there's any reason a child should be molested, or people should have really bad injuries or sicknesses or diseases or whatever it is. But what I do believe is I do believe we can find reason in our suffering, and we can find strength in those dark times that change our lives, that give us empathy, that make us a better person. So when tough stuff happens, you can turn it to your advantage. I don't think it's built in there, but I think we can find those reasons and that kind of stuff. And so I think I've found a lot of reason in that suffering, and I think I have turned it to my advantage in many, many ways. But there's still a lot of fallout that I deal with that's hard. You know, it's still hard every day. And so there's that kind of stuff. But yeah, if I had to give myself some advice there, I don't know if I'd have any advice to give that guy. I think I would just say, hey man, you know, there's some exciting future here. So you just hang in there.
There was no reason to press the noble excuse button.
That's it.
Joey, just before
Yeah.
we end off there, you're a best-selling author, a globally achieved speaker, you're a Dakar racer. If there was one bucket list adventure you still wanted to do, probably solo, what would it be? Just one.
Oh man, dude, there's so much, man. I got a long list still, man. I got a long, long list. But I really, really want to I want to get this Baja 1000 in a few weeks, man. That's been one that's now been a few years, and so that's a big one. So, ah, there's so many things, like racing wise, family wise. I want to grow old, and I want to be, um, physically capable and for a long time that I can do adventures right up until we kick that bucket and they stick you in the box, and I want to be able to travel with my wife. I want to be able to to see my girls develop their own lives. um I think there's like I want to be around and I want to be healthy for many years. So that would be the adventure, to live a um I guess to live a full life, man, and to to run it right into the end zone.
Love it. Thank you for your time, Joey. Absolute pleasure having you on board. And good luck with the Baja on the 13th of November.
There you go. Thanks, brother. We'll see you at the
Cheers,
checkered
buddy.
flag.
Thank you. Cheers, Joey.
Cheers, man.